we're talking about education and youth. You talked about giving your mom the book, and then you also talked about white theory. I'm one to believe, as I talk a whole lot to my dad, it's like we're behind enemy lines here anyway.
Right.
So being behind enemy lines, almost everything is white theory. We have to decode so much of how we interpret anything, any information, strengthening critical thinking skills, as we were having that good discussion yesterday with Joe Black. When we think of education, and I usually like to use the term knowledge, but just broadly, because I think
Right.
education is more of a system, but that's another one of the media words, but it's a term, it's something people can latch on to. Youth, knowledge, education, where do things stand when we think of haves, have nots? Because usually those lines are drawn and you kind of already went into housing. But this is very key because when quote unquote redlining stopped, one of the few things that any real estate agent can definitely say nowadays is it's a good school.
Right.
We know good school is a subtle way of saying it's a lot of white students at this school. Right. So basically a school becomes bad when a lot of black students end up at that school, not because black students are bad, because the school ends up under-resourced.
Right.
When the school ends up under-resourced, then you end up with a quote-unquote bad school. And then that goal post keeps shifting as time goes on. And that's why education plays such a key role, because that usually is the catalyst for people saying, I want to live in a good neighborhood for my kids to go to school.
Right.
You know, so I really want you to frame this in haves and have-nots when we think of education and youth and what impacts and the differences in that. And as we know, they're definitely labels, but we're going to walk in this state of the label.
So Fred Hampton had always referenced a quote that Huey P. Newton said, was people learn through participation and observation. People learn through participation and observation. And I think it was Maya Angelou also said, people may not remember what you say, but how you make them feel. So I talked about my mother. If I gave her on this book, she'd be like, man, I ain't reading one of those books, right? And if we just leave it there, we can interpret it a certain way. I'm an extension of my mother. And part of being an extension of my mother is I read these books. And how do we figure out where she's at and where I'm at? And I think we don't do enough of that. We don't do enough of the internal work of creating operations of how to take where people at and what, because again, like my mother was one of the smartest, if not the smartest person I know. But if I use the educational system of America, she won't measure on that. Before my mother passed, she ran multiple business. She never went to U of M. Business was a School of Ross. She didn't have LLCs and any of those things. But she figured it out, right? And this is what, again, when you talk about like Dr. Carl Taylor talks about the black underworld. Black folks have always had to figure it out because there was different rules. I mean, again, many of us, if we investigate, a lot of our great grandparents and whatnot, they couldn't read or write.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't read or write, but that wasn't an indictment on them. That was an indictment on who? The society that prevented them from reading and write. But despite them couldn't read or write, they still was able to be successful. Was it success based upon what the society told, or success based upon what they was able to take with what we say is make $1 out of 15 cents, or take those lemons and make lemonade with it, right? But what was powerful in that, and what we don't measure, even though my mother didn't want to read these books, and all she had was a high school education, I'm now about to get my PhD. Not because anything is white society, but because this is what I'm saying, the connection. I'm standing on my mother's shoulders. It is out of the aspirations of my mother, out of my grandfather, my grandmother, that I'm able to achieve, right? But also what they drilled in me, okay, you can go get that education, but for what purpose? So when I went to University of Michigan School of Social Work, and they would ask us the question, why are you here to get a social work degree? And I tell them I'm not here to be a social worker. I'm here to get to learn and build off the resources and try to get those resources to my community. So education, if you know about Black folks, we've got the education out of our own lived experience. And this is what makes these books, for those who are capable and should want to read, is within these books. I'm talking about not just any books, like these books that's written about us. And so, like the one book I have up here is "In Love and Struggle," which is a co uh, autobiography of Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs. So we keep talking about the have and have nots, like put in a historical context, right? Aretha Franklin's father was trying to build here in the North the civil rights movement of a version up here in the North. He was, many of us know, he was making his institution very available to community, local, grassroots folks, or who at that time would be considered militant. Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs, at the time, the Henry brothers, and Mario Obadeli and his brother, Reverend Clee, even though he had his own institution, they would utilize those his institution. And as a result of him trying to duplicate the civil rights up in the North, which is non-militant, more get along, go along type of thing, right? And I'm describing what it was. A conflict emerged, a contradiction emerged. Most of us don't know. If you read this book, this way, what Jimmy or the author helps us understand, what Jimmy talks about, the conference that happened in November 1963, right around the corner in the King Solomon Church, the Grassroots Leadership Conference was born out of that have and have nots, because Aretha Franklin's father didn't want to be associated with the militant. Claudia Jones teaches us through her writings not only about Black women but Black people. Again, like you think about your, that grandfather, that great uncle, that great grandmother, like, oh, they so mean, they militant. But why was they militant? Because of the pressure that was on their back. So their education was born out of their experience, which provided them a way to how to deal with that. And that how they deal with it, wanted to create their own opportunities out of their own lived experience. The thing is, one, what we've got away from, of searching for freedom that was on our terms, not on someone else's terms. And so that was the type of education that was shaping Black folks. And so when we pass forward, we can't not negate counterintelligence program. But unfortunately, when we talk about counterintelligence program, we only talk about in this small window, because it was named in the 60s, going through the 60s and the 70s, but it always had existed. It always exists in the world. If you're fighting against something, there's always a counterintelligence program trying to undermine that, because those who in power will never relinquish it without a fight. So again, going back to education, many of us don't know who we are because we live in a society that has written us into their history books. They have written us into their history books. And so they define Nat Turner as what? A villain. But if Nat Turner was white, he wouldn't be a villain. He would be a hero. He would be a hero, right? But because how we've internalized anti-Blackness, we don't see Nat Turner in that same, like we had that debate when we talk about education. Are we fighting for violence or nonviolence or violence? And I forget who said, like, violence and nonviolence is a strategy. It's not a way of life.
And I definitely want to add this, as you know, I love Detroit's Black history. Mm-hmm. And I do have the In Love and Struggle. I haven't finished everything in it and definitely getting to that point. But I want to give a little bit bigger of a framework for Reverend C.L. Franklin and what he represented. And also like Reverend Shuttlesworth down in Cincinnati and everything. I mean, both were pillars in funding the Montgomery bus boycott. Mm-hmm. The money that C.L. Franklin was raising, because he was one of the few reverends that stood beside and stood behind Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. during this time of the Montgomery bus boycott. It fed everything. I don't know if people kind of understand that the Montgomery bus boycott toppled the economy of Alabama and a lot of the South, to the point where the federal government was asked to step in. And that's what really ushered in a lot of the changes, as you say, towards quote unquote integration. But C.L. Franklin also, in this, the stance of, I could definitely see in the militancy, I mean, his role in the way that the Ku Klux Klan was running him out of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. He had a different understanding for the amount of direct violence, right, and which kind of gave him more of an open ear to different strategies when evaluating fighting fighting the machine of this oppressive, violent racism that they were facing.
Right.
So, like in this whole onboarding of, me, I'm big in context. And then even with that, in understanding that, he still definitely he saw a lot of energy in people, like when we think of like the Kenny Snodgrass, the Obadeli brothers, Gaeti, and then he looks at definitely some of the things that were happening with the start of what ended up becoming the Shrine of the Black Madonna.
Mhm.
He saw Detroit as a stronghold and a place where it's like, okay, I can get here because I can maybe find
Right.
more consciousness. And then he saw New Bethel as a post from the history. In my history, I'm quoting from Pastor Smith, Dan Aldrich, Mama Watson, and some people that had relationships with the Franklin family. So I think that it's some context, but in that same context, I definitely see that, like, at some times it's like we need to move, and this understanding, and that's really when we get to how some decisions are made. Because even when we think of the incident of the Republic of New Africa happening in New Bethel Church,
Right.
New Bethel Baptist Church,
Right.
and then him still standing throughout that, but really that kind of being the relationship with him then at that time, Gaeti Obadeli, that, Milton Henry, the great attorney that represented so many, that was a mentor to Chokwe Lumumba, who was one of my mentors too, and so many others. Just navigating these relationships kind of goes back into understanding in education and understanding in context, how things swap and interchange, as if, that need for militancy, that need for violent acts being a strategy, and nonviolent acts being a strategy, and politics being a strategy, and media being a strategy, and so many other strategies of just even keeping like family and feeding people, because that's really what a lot of this, what organizing from a lot of the churches up south, in the north, helping the civil rights movement in the South. And even when we think about the way that was framed, when we think of the ministers of defense and so many others that really were, some shotgun toting black folks that wasn't taking it. But the way that media frames the story of Martin Luther King is that, like, hey, these dogs are going to chase us, some hoses are going to come out and just, get beat up so white people feel bad for us. It was a lot more in that story, but history looks at it differently. Sort of like the story of the relationship between the churches of King Solomon, New Bethel, and the Shrine of Black Madonna. I just wanted to say.
No, all that's important, man. The Institute for Black World developed a question. Is it in the interest of Black people? I repeat. The Institute of Black World, they developed a question that we all have to ask ourselves: is it in the interest of Black people, right? And so that nuance in the context that you're providing also helps us to look at the ideology. There's an ideology right behind these decisions, and W. Du Bois said it best: Black folks in America suffers from, these two warring ideas, being Black and being American. They can't coexist with each other, because black bodies have always suffered as a result of being American, right? And so when we're talking about whether it's violent and nonviolent, I'm talking about more that's a way. That's not a way of life. That is a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the interest, again, is it in the interest of Black people? So, like, if we go back and we look at like King and that group, they was opposed to the Freedom Riders.
Mm-hmm.
Why was they opposed to the Freedom Riders? Because he was in negotiation with Lyndon Johnson and whatnot, because he thought their tactics was necessary, right? Mm-hmm. But not look at those things in a bubble. And it fits within the framework of Detroit in this conversation of have and have nots. So the militancy is we all have it. Like, you step on anybody's shoe in this room, man, you gonna get your ass off my damn shoe. It's nothing, because of how white society, white hegemony has defined it as this negative connotation. We're all militant, which is meaning you take an extreme approach to try to solve, again, your word, a solution. So being militant is born out of trying to find a solution to a fucked up situation. Your foot is on my back. I need to get this motherfucker off my back by any means necessary. But so again, when you like when Kwame Ture and Snick shouts out Black Power.
Mhm.
It becomes a conversational piece. Oh, white hegemony was afraid, but it wasn't a conversational piece around white power. It was okay. But who's setting the table? Who's determining the conversational piece? Because anytime we operate and function to try to change our conditions, it's opposition to something, right?
Mhm.
But then for what end, what goal? Fast forward, we talk about the pastors. I'm going to say Yusef, Bunchy, Shakur, most of the pastors in Detroit are full of shit. Most of them, why they're most of full of shit? Because their interest level is bought into the system. When if we go and read Jesus was what? Jesus was with the people. He ate with the people, he slept with the people. How many pastors are doing that, right? And we can come up with a great reason from a biblical standpoint of why they shouldn't. But it's still logically, it doesn't make goddamn sense if you're saying poor people. But this is where we have to challenge ourselves. Poverty exists because of capitalism, because of the economic structure that we live in. This what creates the have-nots in this city. And we see so many of our so-called Black leaders, at one point, they were standing on this side, then 10 years later, they standing over here. And then the everyday folks, they like, what the fuck?
And that brings to definitely the bookend question of this: young people, because young people observe that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I go through and I look at certain pictures and hear certain stories, I'm shocked and surprised of some of the I guess onboarding of some of these public figures that I feel like do not align themselves with Black empowerment in the Black community that I identify with. How do young people make sense of this? What's the differentiating factor to bring that unity together for that idea of have and have not? And when you do wake up, like you say, with that feeling like, damn, I can't have no J's.
Right.
How does that young person?
But it's not even just young people, man. I mean, when you think again, we're African people, we're holistic. We're a holistic people, not only as young, but our elders, our parents, we're all struggling with those things. And we have to create a mentality in our community that's saying every life is valuable. And then, so if every life is valuable, young people become even more valuable because, as the saying goes, they will inherit the earth or the world that we're going to leave them. And but as a result, young people seeing a lot of fuck shit. So if they saying fuck shit, why you didn't think they'd be on some fuck shit? I remember when what was it? Ken Cocker Jr. and what's Kanye's wife name?
Monica Conyers.
Yeah, Monica. When Monica and Kanye and they was arguing at the city council, she called him Trek or some shit.
I think it's one of the most it's one of the most memorable moments that we know of that council.
No, and I bring that as an illustrated point, right? If this is the type of behavior that we see from our so-called leadership, then why wouldn't we expect that nothing less than the same thing from young folks, right? But also what we're not looking at is there's even in young people, there's different degrees. The young people like you and I grow is different than the young people that's growing up on 7 Mile. Mm-hmm. I know the poverty is shaping folks differently, but also again, poverty has the ability to shape you to be able to want to address that situation. Young people have always been an instrument, has been at the forefront of changing the dynamics. You know, Ella Baker, if it was left up to King and his group, Snick would have been up under them. Snick would have been up under their wing. Ella Baker said, no, be yourself, create your own, develop your own voice. It didn't mean that you don't need elders to help guide you, but you need to force, because she was organized, she saw it. She never really publicly criticized King, but if you read between the lines, there was some indirect things that she said in terms of like leadership is not about if our leadership is dependent on one person, we won't see freedom.
State of Black Detroit 2022 is brought to you by Detroit is Different. You can support Detroit is Different by liking, subscribing, and following Detroit is Different, the website, Facebook page, Instagram page. And also, remember, you can always give to Detroit is Different at Cash App, at Detroit is Different at the cash tag, and through PayPal.